Hey, welcome back to the MF Customs channel. We're going to talk today about the Holley can box. All right, so if you have a Holley Terminator X Max, the regular X, or an HP, you've probably found yourself running out of inputs. So Holley came out with this can IO box over a year ago now. And I've had one shortly after they were first released. It gives you additional 8 inputs and outputs, and we're going to go over what all you can do with it, a lot of misconceptions that people have with them. So for like example, these are pressure transducers from Low Dollar Motorsports and Scarlett Solutions, and then I have an intake air temp sensor here for examples. But you know, these are just samples of what you can run. But the question a lot of people think is, or bring up is this a good replacement for this? Short answer is no. But it's really going to depend on what you're doing. And I'm going to give you an example. Some of you might know this car. This is our test mule. It's a 95 Ford Mustang, originally a V6 car. Now has a 5.0 small block Ford. It's been in it since 2003. It's been something that I have tested products on for years, and now is being tested for MF Customs. But what I wanted to get at was, we installed a Terminator X Max, even though it's a 5-speed car, with a can IO box in it to do a lot of testing, to see what we thought about the box and what all people can do with it. So some things we did with it right off the bat was, because the Terminator X only has 4 inputs and 4 outputs, is I wanted to be able to watch oil temp. And if you have an X series ECU, the Terminator X, you can't run any additional thermistor type sensors. So I ran and you can't see it down there. I'll turn the light on, but you still won't be able to see it, I don't think. But down there is a oil pressure sensor with a temperature sensor built in. So it's a combo sensor from Low Dollar. I also went through and decided to add pan vac, so crankcase. And you won't be able to see it, but back in here, lower intake, I added a coolant pressure. So I want to be able to monitor coolant pressure and still have my standard intake air. I am working on new plumbing, and when that's done, I'm going to run a before and after manifold air temp. So this one will eventually move into here, and then I'll have another sensor that'll replace this, and we can have, you know, before and after, just to see how efficient the Novi 2000 is running and how much heat it is also producing. So one thing we did with outputs, we've talked about inputs, is I have set up the EVAP, the canister purge. This is connected to my charcoal canister, which then vents it into the upper intake. This prevents the car from smelling like fuel when it's just sitting there idling. Instead of venting to atmosphere, I'm venting the vapors back into the intake. Another thing we can't see, but what I did with the outputs, is I hooked up my check engine light. And I'll show you what I did with that in the software, but that gives me the ability to set up warning lights, or, you know, turn the check engine light on for certain sensors if they fall without a range. So we're going to jump into the software and go through it. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to go over the can IO box, what you can not, and I'll repeat that, not do with it. And this is the part that gets a lot of people confusion and leads into trouble after they purchase it and find out that they can't do what they want to do. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to add boost control. Let's say I don't have the supercharger on the car and I have a turbo, and I want to do dome control, boost control, everything in that nature, right? So what'll happen is, you know, when you do this, you'll end up with some outputs that you need to assign. Well, with the can IO box, you can't assign anything that the software itself creates automatically by a checkbox, by an ICF file. That's an individual config file. These cannot go onto the CAN IO box. These need to go on the ECU. So for my case here, I could look at moving my low speed fan and my high speed fans off and putting them onto the CAN box. Because these are manually created and I'm not using the Holley built-in. So that's one option. But keep that in mind. So if you only have these 4 outputs and 4 inputs, like on an HP or on a Terminator X, you will have to move items off if you want them pin mapped directly to the ECU. So again, boost solenoids, items of that nature. So that is the sticking point with it. Okay, so now let's get rid of this because we're not going to do anything with it. Okay, and let's go through and look at what I've done with mine. So with my configuration, I took the last 8 inputs on this page and filled them all out. Originally it was CAN input 1 through 8, so this way I knew what they were, and started assigning them. So like for my coolant pressure, it's just a CAN 5 volt. We'll go into the configure portion. I set up my format as just 1 digit. I did custom pressure, and then I put in the scaling. So in my case, for coolant pressure, I only needed 50 psi, so I'm using a 50 psi transducer, and I scaled it. And then to assign it to the CAN IO box, you click on CAN settings, you tell it you're using the CAN IO module, you're going to tell it which input it's on, which CAN it's on, because if you have a Terminator X or an HP, it's going to be CAN bus 1. If you have an X Max or a Dominator, those actually both have what's called a CAN bus 2. So just make sure you know which CAN you hooked up your box to. Most likely it's going to be CAN 1 if you're using one of Holley's built-in harnesses or you're using one of our built-in harnesses. After that, you just specify the CAN ID and then your broadcast rate. This here can be a number between 1 and 100. What that does is it gives you the ability to, how often do you want to broadcast that data? Things that are not priority, like I don't need instant feedback, I usually set them around 10. So that's still 10 times a second, roughly, of what it's going to advertise. So, we won't go through all of them, but, for like crankcase pressure, I went in. Now this one's kind of goofy looking because my 0 point, anything past the 0 point is boost, and anything below the 0 point is vacuum. And I registered them in inches of mercury, where after the 0 point it's PSI. So it kind of looks funky, but I just did the conversion with math and filled it out. I set up my warnings and everything just so it will show in the software, if I start to build any boost in the crankcase or pressure in the crankcase, it'll, do the yellow and the red in the logs and change everything. Even though it says inches of mercury, it's anything in the positive is in boost. Everything in negative is in vacuum. And then then you get your ability to do thermistors. So like I have my oil temp. I'm going to do a pre and post supercharger intake air temp sensor. So those are both thermistors. I have my clutch pedal on my clutch switch added. Undriven speed, I'm going to be adding a front wheel speed sensor this winter. And then for the outputs, I went very basic and did the same thing. So from 13 down to 20, those are cans 1 through 8 on the module, just like the inputs. Above it, I set up some warnings, and I'm taking the sensor data So, this one here is fuel PSI. So if my RPM is above, idle, boost is above 1 PSI, and my fuel pressure is below 40, it will trigger my check engine light. And that's what each one of these do. So I have them all pre-set up for warnings, and the CAN IO box will then activate the check engine light. Now, I can then eventually take these, once I have these all dialed in where I want them, I can then do an advanced table for safeties to then just either kill the ignition or kill fuel. The other option I did was I wanted my canister purge valve to work again, so this way my car didn't smell like fuel when I was sitting there idling and driving around. So I added that to the CAN IO onto slot 2, output 2, and just did very generic, just, you don't want it sitting there doing it at idle, but you want to do it while you're cruising. So I did somewhere between 1200 and 2500 RPMs, and when my TPS is below 30%, because I don't want it activated when I'm at wide open throttle, and I will never see boost in between these RPM ranges. And CAN is just the same way. You have your output, you tell it which output, you tell it the CAN ID, that's on the back of the module itself, and how often you want to broadcast. But that's really it in the software. These are what you call custom IOs. And so anything custom IO can go on the CAN IO box, because you need to be able to go in here and select, CAN ground, CAN PWM, those settings. So for like my fans, if I needed to do boost solenoids, I could rewire them or depin them from the ECU, pin them into the CAN IO box, and then just add them into whichever output I'm using. So that's it. That is the quick overview of the software. And let's go to the final thoughts on this. So, in the end, my thoughts. I do think this is worth it if you have a Terminator X or X Max and you're wanting to run accessories, things that are not critical to the engine. So things like, say, transcooler fan, sensors like I am. So, crankcase, coolant pressure, things that you just want to monitor. It's great for that. But if you are wanting to do stuff that you need the ECU to make quick decisions on, so things like dome control, boost control, so you're like your boost control solenoids, items like that, those all need to go in the ECU. For the reasons I talked about while I was going through the software, is if you can't pin map it doesn't work on this anyways. So you have to be on the ECU for those to work. Outside that, if you have a turbo car and you're building a turbo car, I'll probably get some heat for this, but just buy a Dominator. As soon as you start messing with it, turning up boost, adding controls, boost control solenoids, vent solenoids, air shifters, anything of that nature, it's just it's a snowball effect, and you just need to go to a Dominator on day one. The HP's a great ECU, but you're limited. So as long as it's not something that you need to have, instant reaction time to, you can have the CAN IO box and be okay. But if you need stuff that's, down to the millisecond reaction times with, you just need to go to Dominator. So if you have any questions, shoot us an email.